Hey everybody, happy Thursday. I'm on here to talk about something that I didn't even know was coming out. It just happened to come up on my suggestions for Netflix, and I'm really excited about it. I watched the first episode last night, and I'm gonna review this episode, and I probably will end up reviewing all of them because I'm really enjoying it. So it's called Ladies First: A Story of Women in Hip Hop. So I got through episode one, Shaping Hip Hop. Um, so I wasn't sure about it, but I know I'm not like I enjoy hip hop music, certain kinds of hip hop music. I'm really a heavy R&B neo soul fan, um, and I appreciate the art, but I also have never really done a lot of study of history of it, or you know, I'm aware of the degradation of women in hip hop, which is also why I have certain kinds of people. Not that I don't listen to problematic people, but you get what I mean. Anyway, so like 15 seconds in, I saw Dream Hampton was an executive producer, and I got super excited because I feel like Dream Hampton did incredible work with producing the stories of black women, um, and giving them a voice with the Surviving R. Kelly series. Like, she did an excellent job. She didn't give us psychologists that we see on CNN and MSNBC, Fox News. She didn't give those kind of people. She went and found real people, to help us understand what was happening. I was in, and then the next round of executive producers, I saw MC Light, and I was like, yes. Now, MC Light is actually somebody I've always respected. I didn't know much about, but for some reason, the way she carried herself, it was just always somebody I admired. How she transitioned into acting, and she was always like working, right? And the way she carried herself and whatever, she's managed to stay relevant, not by selling out, but just by reproducing things. Um, producing things. And I remember her getting that white person together on CNN when Whitney Houston died, and somebody asked her, and they said, well, Whitney died, and maybe this isn't an appropriate time to bring up her issues with drugs. And MC Light, before he could even get that last word out of her mouth, she said, absolutely not. I said, oh shit, I could tell he felt it through the camera, because I did. I was like, don't get popped. Anyway, so I was intrigued. And I'm still on the high from the Montgomery Brawl. Shout out to my people in Montgomery. Shout out to y'all. Shout out to knowing that you don't need a gun. You don't need a knife. You just need a folding chair. Shout out to y'all for sticking together. I'm serious. This is one, but all jokes aside, I have really been encouraged by black people sticking together to protect each other. I don't want to hear this foolishness. Well, why are we celebrating the fight? No, we celebrate self-defense, boo-boo. And if that means a fight, that means a fight. Hello and good morning. Anyway, so I also, getting back to ladies first, I also think it is important, to support black women's stories. And I'm not saying that our support in terms of streaming or buying things always translates or determines if black women get renewed contracts on TV shows or whether their music is getting mass production, that kind of thing. But because racism is real, I like to support things done by us, and if anything, benefit from the knowledge that I can spread in other spaces, which I as a teacher, always have seen and have access to young minds that need to learn, and I need to learn. So they had Queen Latifah and everything, and they're showing the different people. And what I like about the setup, I wasn't prepared for this. I thought they were going to take us through more like a chronological setup, but what I like is the way they've organized it. Even the episode within itself was in 4 parts, and the episode's only 50 minutes to an hour. They don't just take like beginning women rappers and then we have to wait to episode 2, 3, 4, and then we get to Cardi B and 4 or something. You know what I mean? But instead they allow like the newer rappers to have a voice in the episodes and actually tell their stories at the beginning, as well as the older rappers, so we can kind of see what traditions and parallels there have been. All right, so part 1, building shit out of nothing. I said, okay, that's every black woman's story. So we get Dr. Joan Morgan of NYU, and she starts off by talking about how she has been listening to women as long as hip-hop existed. But she was like, women have been treated as these sort of exceptions, that made it through these male spaces, as opposed to people who shaped the culture. And that to me was profound, because I was like, yeah, I've pretty much seen women as people who shape certain trends, But I didn't think about it like that. So that was good. So we start with Ciroc. She was the first female MC of hip hop. I'm embarrassed to say, but I did learn something new every day. I didn't know about her. So she said she didn't come in when rap music was actually a genre. She was like, I just came in on the ground floor. And I didn't, like I said, I didn't hear of her before this. She was from Wilmington, North Carolina, and moved to the Bronx. And she said at that time it was a war zone, because of drugs and things like that. She said, but it was also this thriving space for black people. And I feel like that's a lot of black people's stories. Like, we're always constantly battling racism. There's never been a time since the first African was brought to the shores of America, the continental United States, okay, that African Americans have not been battling racism, white supremacy, brutality against our bodies, our psychology, everything. And somehow, and I'm not trying to romanticize it, we've still managed to produce things, culture, music, a history of survival and resilience. So Dee Barnes is interviewed. Shout out to her. She talked about how nobody knew hip hop was going to really be as big as it was when it first began. I'm so happy to see her getting more opportunities. I think she has a new show on YouTube. Why is the name of it escaping me? But you can look up Dee Barnes. She's interviewing people. And I'm really happy to see her getting more opportunities that, one, should have never been taken away from her. Even though it's decades later, after Dr. Dre savagely beat her, where there were many witnesses. And then the next thing we know, she's losing her home and this, that, and the other. And that happens to black women a lot. A lot. And Dr. Dre should have suffered way more consequences. Instead, he gets applauded at the Grammys. So shout out to Dee Barnes. So they talk about how the first rap group was put together by a woman named Sylvia Robertson. I had no idea. Once again, a black woman had put together Sugar Hill Gang. So they make the point that hip hop in and of itself wouldn't even exist without Sylvia Robertson. So she became CEO of Sugar Hill Records. Rapper's Delight was the first successful hip hop song. I had been trying to learn the words, not consistently enough, because otherwise I know the words to Rapper's Delight, but I really want to get good at that for some reason. I just want to pop out with that one day, just like in a serious moment, and just start doing it. So she purposely included, they said that Sylvia Robertson purposely included white women in the videos of Sugar Hill Gang for the crossover effect. And that's something that people were still trying to learn in the 1970s, how to have the crossover effect. And that doesn't always mean people are intentionally trying to sell out, as much as it means, yeah, we want this music mass produced, and if people see white people in it, they might be more drawn to it. And you don't know how people are going to exploit things like that later on in life. We don't know that. So anyway, so Queen Latifah and other women are being interviewed, and they start talking about how black women are the most disrespected and deprived. Hell, Malcolm X told us that, and he wasn't even a black woman. Before that, Zora Neale Hurston said black Negro women are the mule of the world. Okay, in her book, Their Eyes Are Watching God. Okay, this is not news, but it is still the case. And they start explaining why the verb hustling and making something out of nothing becomes so important in hip hop, because despite bad economic situations, lack of access to education, black women are persevering still. They have to figure out a way. So I was like, that's actually unique, because I'm always thinking about, drug deals or just make extra money on the side. And typically that image in my mind has been male. So once again, I'm learning and unlearning things still. And I want to spend the rest of my life being a constant learner, because I think once you think you know everything, you might as well just walk to the grave and put yourself in there, because what else is there to live for? Anyway, so we get to Roxanne Shante. Now, Roxanne Shante I knew about, but once again, only because of that miniseries about her life, which was touching. It wasn't a miniseries, it was a movie, and in my mind, I thought it should have been a miniseries. I wanted to know more. So anyway, she was born in Queensbridge, Long Island, the Queensbridge Projects or whatever, and she said it was had one of the largest prostitution rings at that time. And anytime there's poverty, you can be sure, prostitution, sexual exploitation of women, drugs, all of that. Crime comes with that. So she said her mother used to sell wipes and washcloths to prostitutes, said keep it clean. She said her mother would do that at night to make money. And she said, and I watched her do that. And she said even the prostitutes would ask her, well, we gonna ever see you out in the street? She said, mm-mm. She said her mother said, I sell products, not pussy. And I said, you know what? You got to have enough respect for yourself and to teach your kids that early, because people can get into too much trouble. And so she said, I learned to hustle. She said by selling drugs at one point. She was like, but not pussy. She said, I told you how my mama felt about it. So she said she was inspired, actually, by Nipsey Russell. And that's what I like about the documentary, because it lets us know, who's influencing these people. She said Nipsey Russell, of course, being the legendary comedian who would rhyme his comedy and his reads, essentially, right? Which is where, of course, Nipsey Hussle had gotten his name from. But Nipsey Russell is the original. And she said, so I like the way he could spit words. So she said she decided, she just really started entering rap and battling, and she called it rhyming, really because it was just money. And she said she battled for $50, and in order to get in, she had to put $50 in there. So her mother went down to the numbers man and said, let me borrow $50. And Shantae said, I asked my mother, can I curse? And she was like, I don't care what you do. You just better get this $50. $50 is nothing to play with. Hell, I'll take $50 now, inflation and everything. But especially at that point, $50 could take you through a week or two. Of course, spread it thin, but you get my point. So, UTFO, a male rap group, puts out a record about a fictional girl who wouldn't sleep with them. And her name was Roxanne. And it wasn't about Roxanne Shantae. It was, once again, a fictional character who just would not sleep with them. That was part of the story that they were rapping about. But she essentially makes a diss track to that song. And it's the first recorded, understood diss track in hip-hop history. Just basing it off of even a fictional response to their fictional story. And people presumed that she was the Roxanne, and she wasn't. Marketing. Even if it was unintentional. Diss track is Roxanne Shantae for something, that really didn't exist. So it became a hit after putting this diss track out after like 15 minutes. She was like, I had to go to the laundromat to wash clothes. So while I was in the laundromat, I did this diss track. I did it in 15 minutes. She said, I wasn't even thinking about that in terms of like even being an artist. She was like, I was just trying to make money. Like I said, that's all I was trying to do. And she did that at 14 years old. And sometimes all I can think in these situations when I hear these stories, and how you know something and then you know something, like all the genius that is not cultivated, all the education that Black people are denied and spared, that if she was doing this at 14, imagine if she didn't have to fight poverty and wasn't always looking for a way to make money, and school couldn't be her priority. You know what I mean? Like, and I do think that's intentional. I think that is actually by design, considering that even schools can be very hostile places for Black children. And sending your kid to a white one doesn't fix it. I know, because I work there. I work at those. Okay? And trust and believe, I've had to stick my neck out many a time, which I don't mind doing. I just hate the fact that it's happening to Black kids. I hate the fact that I have to do it because other people are willing to hurt them. So anyway, stuff like that always goes through my mind. So they said she was putting in work for money more than being an artist. And she has influenced all of the female rappers. Like Cash Doll, who I knew very little about. I only knew because she was on the Shade Room. I've heard her name. I didn't know nothing about her because everybody starts to sound alike, look alike. But anyway, so Cash Doll gets a little piece. So they started talking about Cash Doll was raised in Detroit. Once you say Detroit, I'm already looking at people like, to make it out is rough. Is rough. And I know this because I went to college. My roommate, one of my good friends, was out of Detroit, and some of those stories that she told me. I mean, I remember just kind of sitting on the bed, kind of like, and that's when I didn't realize how innocent and naive I must have been. But this was really my first kind of interaction with certain things, and I'm just sitting there like, that happened to you? Wait, that happened to your mother? That happened to... How? How'd she even get here? That's a miracle. Like, I remember. And even other people I met from Detroit, I was like, what the fuck? And it wasn't that these people weren't smart. Obviously, you know, they made it to college and stuff. But it was just like, yeah, that takes a level of resilience. So even though I was like, Shade Room, Cash Doll, who is she, whatever, when I heard Detroit, I said, okay, I got to listen to this because I know she got a story. So she was the oldest of 6 kids. She said her mother had 6 kids by the time she was 21. And she said, I always had a bunch of jobs. She was like, I worked at Little Caesars. I worked here. I worked here. And she said, and then, you know, her friends, people she was around, said she could make more money if she was, you know, stripping. And she said she became the highest paid stripper in Detroit. And people, you know, people always say dancer and that kind of thing. But I'm just kind of like, I feel like if we dress it up as exotic dancer, then we don't understand how negative the effects are. And she was like, I had made like $26,000 just for my birthday alone. She said, I don't know how I made it to this time. She said, I got to the point where I wasn't even taking off my bra. I would just get up there and rap, like basically half naked. And she said then she decided to take that money and put it into studio time in the music. She was like, in the first kind of single, I got paid like $2,500. She was like, you know, that was nothing compared to the money I was making stripping. But I was thinking to myself, honestly, hun, though, in terms of an investment, stripping got to come to an end. You know what I mean? Like in terms of bodies, in terms of what people see, don't see, like, don't like. That was smart. And once again, it's this idea of hustling and making something out of nothing. You know what I mean? And once again, I started thinking to myself, here we go. A young girl who tried to do it by the book, was doing regular jobs, trying to help support her family, this, that, and the other. And prostitution, sex work, not prostitution, stripping, sex work becomes the way in which people can get a lot of money really quick. Drugs, we can argue, is selling drugs is the same way. But it's not, it's short-lived. So I think she was very smart to make that decision. So part two of this documentary, like I said, it's really organized in detail, and I was loving it. So I might as well be who I am. Okay, is the title of part 2. So we get MC Lyte, and MC Lyte looks great. Like, you know, some people are just like, we talk about people being ageless, but like really meaning it. Like, whatever you're doing, keep drinking your water, your alkaline water. Okay, so she says people always ask her how it is to be a woman in the music business. And she said, I don't know. She said, I've always been a woman in music. I don't know anything else. I don't know what it is to be a man in music. I don't know what it is to be anybody else. She said, so all I can do is tell my story. She said, I don't know another way. And I was like, you know what? That's a good way to respond to that. So she said she went to a very socially conscious African school. And, you know, growing up in the 70s, and there's this whole book. What is it called? Because it's on how in the 70s, it talks about the history of socially conscious black schools, but how in the 70s there was a peak of those. And it wasn't because black people had a whole lot of money, but they would put their resources in the community, and they wanted their kids to be able to develop a sense of self. And the bottom line is, it worked for MC Lyte. It did her good. So she said she heard Chirac, Roxanne Shante, she said in Salt and Pepper, and that influenced her. I can't wait till we get to Salt and Pepper for some reason. So she was rapping. I mean, I like Salt and Pepper, but it's just, I'm really kind of, I want the inside on them. So she was rapping about Black history and how she grew up in those early parts, you know, of her career. And she said, a friend of mine who I was making rhymes with in school, she was like, he said to me, "Hey, they're looking for a female MC. You should come." She go, so I go to where he tells me to go. I go into a basement with 9 guys, and I got scared. I said, "Ooh, what is the rest of the story gonna be?" But anyway, it wasn't. But I did get nervous for her. All right, but anyway, because of her friend, she said she was rhyming, and as she was doing it, she said, she's just kind of doing what she does. He began making the beat as she was, rhyming and talking and rapping. And she said, that's how I got the single, I Crammed to Understand You. And she said she grew up in Brooklyn, but spent a lot of time in Spanish Harlem, that's East Harlem, with her grandmother. And she was like, so she saw the drugs, she saw the problems with addiction, and she was like, first, it seemed like there were no drugs, and then all of a sudden they were everywhere in the community. She said, so she put the single in first person. She said, because nobody was talking about drugs. She said, so I made it my story. And when you think about those early rap music, they're always telling somebody else's story, right? Or they make it seem secondary, like they're just observing it. And she said, well, I did it from first person. So I look back on it, nobody else was doing that. So it's a wonder it became a hit, but she said it did. She said, but also nobody else was talking about drugs in their rap music. The effect of drugs, that kind of thing. And that's how she was talking about it, not like glorifying it as it later became. So, Light as a rock was, the first woman to drop a hip hop album. Okay, before it was just singles. She actually, dropped a whole body of work. And Poor Georgie was another single. And she said her strength was storytelling. So then we get to Rhapsody. Right, so Rhapsody talks about how she was influenced by MC Lyte. And she said, I grew up in North Carolina, the way they call it, like the sticks. And I was like, yep, that's how people describe you when you're from the South. Especially if you didn't grow up in a city in a rural area, it's the sticks. So she said she grew up Jehovah's Witness, but her parents weren't strict, which is unusual because I was waiting for all the restrictions that come with that. So she said she was country and people didn't really feel like, being country had a place in hip hop. And that makes sense because most of the music was coming out of New York. Okay. And then when we get like West Coasters, even then they're from like Crenshaw, parts of, LA, parts of Oakland, still very urban areas. But we know Southern culture, particularly around Atlanta and other places in the South, ends up having a big deal and a big impact in hip hop. You just have to wait for your time. But anyway, so she was like, because she lived so removed from like the urban stuff, she said most of the stuff she learned was from music videos and music shows like Video Soul and Rap City back when BET was BET in the 90s. Back when Bob Johnson owned it, back before they sold it to Bob Johnson sold it to white people and shit. So she said that became part of her development. But, we're still getting the story. So then we get Tierra Whack. Okay, let me tell you how I became introduced to Tierra Whack, and no, it wasn't because of Beyonce's remix. I heard one of her songs, Clones, on Lovecraft Country, because I remember they were playing it in the background, and I was like, this shit is hot. So I put on the subtitles to figure out who was that, and I downloaded, that is still my song. And I've appreciated her work ever since. And apparently Queen Beyonce does too. So Tierra Whack is talking about how she was from North Philly, and she was like, it was bad. That is news to no one. I hope, and if it is news to you, now you know. So she said she had an imagination. She said because it was so bad, she said even her mother, sometimes she would look out the window and see things, and her mother would be like, stay away from that window. And in communities where you have a lot of gunshots, people do tell you to stay away from the window because just like anything else, stray bullets can hit anybody, whether they intend to hit you or not. And she said, and I guess because her mother tried to protect her from so much, she was like, I lived in a bad neighborhood, but I developed an imagination because I couldn't do that much. So even though things were bad in reality, in my head they were good. I just thought it was so cute. So she said she listened to the guys and they were talking about the street stuff. And she said, I felt like that's what I had to do too. And her mother was like, you can't rap about things like that. She said, because that's not in your life. Hashtag facts. Parents got to keep it real with their kids. So she said she did practice rapping though. And her mother saw like a group of kids, not a group of kids, group of thugs on the corner, and told her to get out the car and rap to them. And she was rapping to a bunch of gangsters. She said, and they're recording her. She's like 13, 14 years old. And she said, so I call myself rapping, this, that, and the other. You could tell she was young. And they said most of the gangsters weren't feeling it. Like, this is whack. This is some lame shit. She said, but the one OG, like the guy who was basically like the leader of the crew, was like, no, I'm rocking with her. She was like, that's the only reason why that even gave life. And she said, and then of course it went viral and that kind of thing. I'm like, damn, there's so much luck involved in this shit. So part 3, Fight the Power, okay? And we start with none other than Queen Latifah. So she says she started to write poetry as a kid. And this is, I think, what people really miss. And I think people in general, and I think the larger white culture has encouraged us to pretend like things that we're good at is somehow natural, which means by saying it's natural, it takes away from the hard work and commitment Black people put into their gifts and their talents. I know, just as somebody who studied history and who focused on African American social and political movements, how people try to act like that came to me through osmosis, because that's their way of degrading your intellect. That was in graduate school, happened viciously at UCLA, and luckily I had my HBCU training, and most of all the power of God to keep me from losing my mind. But let me tell you something, some people was, whoo, child. And I just think about that, let me stop. Think about that when she started talking about how she used to write poetry as a kid. That's a craft. That's a skill. I wasn't good at poetry in school. I still don't find poetry really that interesting. I don't really get the hype. But anyway, so she said she would leave her job at Burger King as a teenager and go into New York. She said she loved KRS-One. She said, I loved MC Light, and they show her in a picture with, Tupac back when they were just doing like basic, kind of club stuff. She said, but the reason why she liked KRS-One, MC Light, because they were talking about real issues. She said her African look really came about, she said, because I needed to look different. She said, I really wasn't thinking necessarily like, okay, yeah, I want to be, Nefertiti or Cleopatra. I mean, she didn't say that, but I'm just saying that. And she said, so I had to distinguish myself because I didn't want to come out trying to look like MC Light or Salt and Pepper, because then you just look like a copycat. So she said she decided to do Ladies First, the song, because there needed to be something by Black women about Black women. So she has her African look, the kufis and things like that, and that becomes what she's, known for. And Ladies First, and then so after that single, she said they were watching what was happening in South Africa with apartheid. And she said, I couldn't go over to South Africa, but I could watch the news and I could make music and support those people because that was familiar to me. Racism was familiar to me. Segregation was familiar to me. And I understood. So Queen Latifah made songs about domestic violence. So 1995 comes around, and Queen Latifah wins the Grammy for Untitled. And I'm gonna keep it all the way real with you. I always knew the refrain Untitled, but I promise you, I did not know anything about what that song was about. So it wasn't until I got to Spelman, and it's not even coming through like Spelman College education per se. My boyfriend at the time, went to Morehouse, and he started playing some Queen Latifah that night. We were at his townhouse or whatever, and I was like, "Are you serious?" Like, he was like, "What do you mean?" I was like, "Untitled, seriously? That was the only thing you could find?" I was like, "For real?" And he was like, "What?" He was like, "You're not against domestic violence? Have you ever listened to the words?" And I hadn't. I really hadn't. I was just like, "This is old. Like, why don't you just play some Master P in 2006?" Like, I mean, I was going in. And that changed my whole perspective, one, on it, because I actually sat down and listened. My dumbass hadn't done that before. And it helped me understand where Queen Latifah was, and the fact that was very bold to talk about that. because she was talking about that intra-racially within the black community. And that's usually like, when I reviewed the book Arrested Justice the other day, it's something that gets swept under the rug because black women often feel the need, one, just the effects of domestic violence, right? It's a dirty little secret for lots of people. And then being black in this society and black women knowing how hard black men get it, feel the need to protect them while not protecting themselves all the time or their children, or not knowing how. So anyway, that changed my perspective. So then we get Sister Souljah, baby. Once again, I'm telling you, I'm learning a lot through this documentary. I didn't realize she had been part of Public Enemy. And she was in college at Rutgers, and she really helped push Rutgers in terms of, getting signatures and petitions to be the first university to divest from South Africa, because that had a lot to do with it. The amount of American money still funding South African apartheid, so we could get, diamonds, gas for cheap, so on and so forth. I remember my father saying how he didn't drink Coca-Cola for years because they would not divest from South Africa. And he was like, I remember when they finally divested, he said, "Ooh, I was so happy to get a Coca-Cola." I mean, shout out to the ATL, that's what we drink down there in Georgia. All right, anyway, so she was talking about, Sister Souljah was talking about campaigns, dealing with mass racial violence that, once again, has always been a part of American history, and of course, black women leading the way. So Bill Clinton decided he would talk about Sister Souljah as he was running for president in 1992. And, he had been on the Arsenio Hall show. We all know how they've made that like this moment. Playing the saxophone and, the little things people do or feel like they only have to do to get the African American vote is insulting. It's insulting. But while simultaneously being on Arsenio Hall and people clapping and shit 'cause he can play the fucking saxophone. Okay. Like there aren't plenty of black people to do. Woo! All the jazz musicians, they got skipped over, and all the money white record companies made off of jazz, and then people didn't have it. Ugh, makes me mad. But anyway, while simultaneously doing this on Arsenio Hall, he's also trying to court the white Republican vote. And as a white man from Arkansas, okay, couldn't have been that hard. So he uses Sister Souljah's rap lyrics and, speeches she had made specifically in a speech to a white audience, because she said, "Do you know any good white people? Because I don't know any." And basically suggesting that she was wrong for her lyrics, because he was like, "Yeah, there are plenty of good white people. They're right here in this room." And I was thinking to myself, you motherfucker, you. Not that I ever expected more of Bill Clinton. And considering the fact that he has a history of rape allegations, okay, and you can check, and if you think I'm making this up, you can go ahead and look up the Clinton Affair that was produced by A&E, okay, that you can get, check your streaming, that was produced in 2018, and it will help you make a whole lot of sense. And let me tell you something. Monica Lewinsky was not the only person under the spell of Bill Clinton, nor sexually used. This was a man well into his 50s. She was 22, 23, 24. Give me a fucking break. And she suffered, but you want to come after Sister Souljah. Okay. And no, that moment wasn't in the documentary, but I'm making the point, okay? So he chooses to attack, and she says this, Bill Clinton chose to attack a young African woman, but not the issues I was talking about mass racial violence. And now my question is, where were the black men in hip-hop defending her? Where were, we know the Tupacs of the world were getting on and influenced by her or whatever, but where were they? That's what I'm trying to figure out. Where were their voices? Because I didn't see them. Now I got to do some more research. But my point is, and he chose a black woman to attack. Once again, we're low-hanging fruit. Because nobody protects us but each other. And when relatively powerless people, I say relatively because we persevere, get attacked and only they can defend each other, sometimes it's easy to ignore. Unless you got a folding chair. Okay. So then they start talking about the Obama era. They were like how things have changed because hip hop was being performed in the East Room for the first time. Queen Latifah introduces MC Light. I think personally they gave the Obamas a bit too much credit. But when you have a former aide speaking in the documentary, I guess you're going to have some propaganda. But okay. So we would have appreciated policies that protected us, and we would have also appreciated not having Black Lives Matter start under the first black president because you were not coming out for us and you thought it was enough to say, if I had a son, he looked like Trayvon Martin. None of us were confused, honey, about what your son would look like. You're black, your wife is black, and so are your kids. I don't care nothing about no white mama, white grandparents. We know what it is. Anyway, so then they talk about how black women have always been political, and then they bring up Cardi B, so on and so forth. All right, so then we get to part 4 called Super Duper Fly. All right, so one of the points they bring up in this part, and this is the last part of the first episode, American culture doesn't really have much style without black women. And they talk about how black women have influenced style, language, dress, but we just don't get credit for it, which is true. Black women wear bamboo earrings, bantu knots, braids, all that's considered unprofessional until the Kardashians get their hand on it, until that dumb white woman who got on there trying to pretend like she had created the rap as if black women hadn't always been wearing wraps around their head all the way back to Africa and now. Anyway, so they talked about how people looked at what you had on before they listened to you. So therefore, style was very important. And that's still true for a lot of women. So then they start talking about how black women started to visualize wardrobes and taking the street stuff and creating black women's clothes. They were like, because the stuff in the store wasn't really how, I mean, like, you know, if you go to like larger department stores, it wasn't really how black women dress. People didn't see a market in that. So a lot of times, like even when we think about Jada Pinkett's character on A Different World, how she would cut up her clothes and she would do, I mean, that really is what a lot of black girls were doing. And then they started to talk about how black women started to, you know, do this. And they brought up Misa Hilton, who's a big fashion designer, and Missy. And they talk about Missy's influence. And I absolutely love Missy Elliott. So Missy, they were like completely changed fashion and what we think in terms was possible. One, they were like, she's a dark-skinned black woman. She's heavy. And what people told her she couldn't do, she did just because she was a dark-skinned, heavy black woman. She actually pushes to do it and makes everything they said untrue. So a lot of people said that in the music industry, because of the way she looks, she's not going to make it, this and the other. So she decided she would be all the way out there. And quite frankly, at the point in which people stop or refuse to believe in you, you have two choices. You can give up or you can say, fuck it, I'm going to push it. And she pushed it. And I appreciate that. So we thank you, Missy Elliott. And they were all like, I mean, they were basically like, all hail Missy. They said there's a direct line between Missy Elliott and the way Nicki Minaj was able to create this kind of weird kind of style. And Tierra Whack, all of them are influenced by her because, one, she trailblazed. There was a path now to being different and what that meant and what that looked like. So anyway, I'm going to be watching episodes 2, 3, and 4, and I really think this is worth a watch. I'm learning a lot. For some of y'all, this may not be news, but this, for me, a lot of this is new, and I really appreciate this. So I'll talk to y'all soon. Y'all have a good Thursday, and yeah, bye.